He stood in the doorway, unable to believe his eyes. His little girl, who hadn't eaten for 2 weeks, was holding a piece of bread and chewing. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and all he could think about was how he'd lost his wife 6 months ago. Katerina had passed away in an accident, and the house had suddenly become quiet, as if someone had turned off the lights in the middle of the day. 3-year-old Sophia didn't understand death. She just knew her mother would never return. Something inside her had broken. She stopped talking, stopped playing, stopped smiling. 2 weeks ago, she'd stopped eating. Her father had hired the best doctors, psychologists, and nutritionists. But no one could break through her silence. The girl was slowly melting before his eyes, and the rich man's house was filling with emptiness. James tried to sit with her for hours, begging, pleading, promising all sorts of things, but Sophia wouldn't look at him. Her gaze seemed to be on the other side of the world. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who had raised Sophia from infancy, cried every time she saw the child withdraw into herself. Money couldn't bring back laughter. All the riches in the world were powerless against the emptiness that devoured children from within. One early afternoon, a new helper arrived at the house. Her name was Jessica. She was young, quiet, from a poor neighborhood where people saved on bread, not on love. When Mrs. Chen told her about Sophia, Jessica wasn't surprised. Her look wasn't one of shock, but of understanding. At 7, her mother had also died, and Jessica remembered the day the world became too heavy to breathe. That same day, after lunch, Jessica went up to Sophia's room. She didn't force the girl to eat, didn't try to heal with words. She simply sat next to her and told her story. She told her about loss, about how the pain is so intense that it seems easier not to live. Her voice was quiet, simple. Sophia shuddered slightly, her eyes flickering briefly, as if someone had gently touched her frozen hand. The next morning, Jessica prepared a simple meal, bread with butter and a pinch of salt. Nothing luxurious, nothing a billionaire would buy. She sat down next to Sophia and began to eat herself, slowly, without rushing. The girl watched. For the first time in 2 weeks, she reached out. Mrs. Chen. James ran in and froze in the doorway, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. His daughter was holding the bread and crying, and a strange woman sat next to her. The history of the house continued quietly. Jessica arrived early, left late, worked in the kitchen, washed, cleaned, but her thoughts were always with the girl upstairs. The kitchen of the enormous penthouse seemed to her like a sacred place, where they brought not just food, but hope. She looked at the unused delicacies in the refrigerator and thought about the simple things children smell. The smell of warm bread, the taste of cheese, the warmth of a hand next to them. James, tall, in a suit, with the face of a man who sleeps an hour a night, saw her as part of the bustle of the household. He rarely spoke to the new girl, but one day, when Jessica offered him a sandwich, he looked at her differently. He asked wearily, but there was no anger in his voice, just weariness. "As long as it takes," she replied. Something like surprise flickered in his gaze, and James walked away, as if carrying a burden he couldn't show anyone. She whispered under her breath, "I don't know what to do, Lord." This conviction wasn't based on reading psychology books, but on the simple memory of someone holding her hand when she could barely stand from grief. That first day, she explored the house, sweeping what was already clean so as not to think about fear, but so that her heart would learn to listen. Every room was filled with photographs. Sophia on a swing, Sophia in her mother's arms, her mother laughing, snaps from life that now hung as a reminder of what could never be returned. The doorway to the nursery was barely open. Jessica knocked, entered quietly, and sat not close, but not far either, at a distance that neither oppresses nor lets go. She didn't say, "Try it, it's good for you." She said, "You don't have to eat if you don't want to." It was the beginning. The next morning, Jessica came home even earlier than usual. She had barely slept that night. Every minute she remembered Sophia speaking for the first time in a long time. The girl hadn't simply heard her story. She recognized herself in it. And that meant a thin thread had formed between them, one that couldn't be broken. The kitchen was dark. Only the lamp over the stove cast a soft light. Jessica went to the refrigerator, opened the door, and stared for a long time at the perfect containers of the right food. They were made according to expert recommendations, scheduled by the hour, by the calories. But they didn't speak to a child's pain. They didn't know its emptiness. They didn't know that the loss of a mother can't be cured by diet. She took out ordinary white bread, a pack of butter, cheese in thin packaging. Simple smells from her childhood. Those smells that made her feel like the world could still be warm. Mrs. Chen entered the kitchen and looked at the table in surprise. "Are you all right?" she asked anxiously. Jessica nodded. Sometimes a child needs something unhealthy. While she was toasting bread, James entered the kitchen. He was wearing workout clothes after a morning run, but he looked like he was running from himself. He saw the frying pan and suddenly tensed. "This isn't on her meal plan," he said coldly, as if defending walls that had long since cracked. Jessica turned to him calmly. "She's not eating your plan. She hasn't eaten for 2 weeks." He looked at her as if caught between fear and hope. "If this doesn't work, you're fired," he said quietly, almost wearily. She nodded. There was no challenge in those words, but truth. James turned away because the truth reflected too painfully in the window glass. When Jessica came upstairs with the plate, her hands trembled, not from fear of losing her job, but from the hope that the little girl would take another step. She knocked softly, entered, and sat in the same place. Sophia was in her usual position, a small bundle of pain in the corner of the room. Jessica took one of the triangles and slowly bit into it. The room was filled with the soft sound of chewing, as if the world was listening. Sophia turned her head slightly. Her gaze fell on the plate. She put the triangle back and said, "My mother made one just like this." Her small fingers trembled slightly, as if they wanted to touch the past. Then Sophia spoke. Her voice was so quiet it could have been mistaken for breathing. It was a crack in the frozen wall. Jessica smiled without moving closer. The girl looked at the bread as if she saw in it a door to an old world where her mother was alive. Then the tears came. She whispered. Jessica exhaled because those words were too similar to her own when she was 7. "No, baby." The girl inhaled softly. Her weak hand rose. And for the first time in many days, she took the food. She took a tiny bite, closed her eyes, and pain appeared on her face, real living pain. She began to cry the way children cry who have been silent for too long. Jessica held her close, not stopping the sobs. "Cry, honey. It's not weakness." James stood in the doorway. He held his hand to his mouth, shaking, unable to move. He watched his daughter finally allow herself to break and simultaneously begin to live again. He watched her eat a small piece of bread and understood that this was the miracle he had been waiting for but didn't know how to ask for. When Sophia fell asleep after crying, James and Jessica remained sitting next to her. He looked at her as if she were someone who pulls the sun out of the darkness, he asked quietly. She looked at the girl's closed eyes. "I didn't understand." He covered his face with his hands, finally allowing himself to break next to someone. That night, for the first time in the house, it became easier to breathe. Sophia fell asleep not in emptiness, but among people who held her pain together. The house, which yesterday had resembled a dark hallway, suddenly became a place where pain could come out without destroying everyone. It was only the first step, but the most important. The night passed, and it was as if the house itself had become quieter, calmer. But even in this silence, Jessica felt heaviness, as if the air was waiting for the next step, the next word that would change everything. Sophia slept for a long time, her small body tired from pain, tears, and the first sips of food in long days. In the morning, when the first rays of light ran along the walls of the penthouse, James sat in a chair next to his daughter's bed. He hadn't slept a wink all night. He looked at Sophia like a father afraid to even blink lest he lose the miracle that had just come to life. His fingers barely touched the blanket, as if he were holding on to her even as she slept. Jessica entered quietly, holding a cup of coffee. She set it down next to her and almost left so as not to disturb her, but heard his whisper, "Stop." She turned around. In the dim light, his face looked tired, but there was a faint spark in his eyes. Not hope, but something close to it. He asked again, without looking up from his daughter. Jessica didn't answer right away. She slowly walked over and sat down in the second chair. "I didn't know." She clasped her hands in her knees, remembering her 7-year-old self. "When my mother died, I thought that if I stopped eating, God would bring her back to me." James closed his eyes. It hurt him to listen, but those words explained everything. "Sophia," he looked at the girl. "Yes," Jessica answered softly. The house was quiet for several hours. Sophia slept, and Jessica and James went down to the kitchen to let her rest. In the kitchen, Mrs. Chen was making a light soup, but her hands were shaking. She had heard part of the conversation during the night and could not accept that the little girl had carried such a heavy thought for so long. "Children never speak directly," she said, putting the pot on the stove. "They think that if they tell the truth, they will hurt adults." James stood by the window, pressing his palms to the cold glass. "I thought I was protecting her, with work, plans, doctors." Jessica came closer. "You're not a bad father. You were a wounded father." He looked up at her, his eyes full of guilt. "But it turned out the opposite," Jessica replied. "She thought you'd forgotten her." Those words hit him harder than anything else. He sank into a chair, covered his face with his hands, and sat there for a long time until his breathing became more even. She simply sat next to him, giving him the same silence she'd given Sophia, the silence in which healing begins. Around lunchtime, Sophia woke up. She looked tired, but no longer so empty. There was something new in her eyes, warm, though weak, like morning light. James ran upstairs, as if afraid she'd disappear if he hesitated even a second. He fell to his knees beside the bed and took her small hand. "I'm here, darling." Sophia looked at his face for a long time, as if searching for something she'd long lost. He shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Never." She nodded, as if for the first time she allowed herself to believe him, and yet, in her eyes remained a question she was afraid to utter. That evening, after Sophia had been put to bed, James approached Jessica. He looked like a man who had just seen the depth of the abyss over which his daughter stood. "We were so close to losing her," he whispered. Jessica nodded slowly. "Yes, but you held her." He sat on the sofa, his head wearily resting in his hands. "Start simple," she said softly. "Be there tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and again." That night, Jessica lay for a long time in her small staff room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Sophia. The girl had taken the first step, but ahead lay the real truth, one she still held within herself. A truth that needed to come out for the healing to be complete. But Jessica knew, when a child's heart opens for the first time, it speaks more than adults hear. And very soon, Sophia would say something that would change everything. Several days passed, and the house gradually began to fill with sounds that had long since disappeared. Sophia's light laughter, cautious footsteps, quiet questions. It all seemed like a miracle. But beneath this quiet joy lay a heavy truth that the girl hadn't fully spoken, and Jessica felt it with all her heart. On Sunday morning, the kitchen filled with the smell of butter and bread. James stood at the stove, making breakfast himself for the first time in months. He awkwardly turned the bread, and Sophia laughed nearby, sitting on a small stool. Her laughter was still weak, but alive. Jessica watched them from the sidelines, afraid to even breathe loudly, lest she frighten the fragile new life that was beginning to sprout in their home. "Sophia," said, trying to maintain a stern expression, but her lips trembled with a betraying smile. "It tastes better this way," James replied, then turned to Jessica. "You were right." She smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a shadow that hadn't left her for days. Sophia ate, talked, laughed, but sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her gaze grew heavy, as if there was still a fear inside that hadn't gone away. Jessica knew that look. She'd worn it herself for years. A week after Sophia's first meal, James decided they should spend the evening together, the three of them. He suggested watching cartoons in the living room. Sophia settled between them, holding one finger in each hand, Jessica's and James's, as if she were afraid that if she let go of either hand, someone would disappear. The question was asked so carefully, as if the girl's heart was hanging by a thread. "No, baby," Jessica replied. Sophia nodded, but something inside her was still stirring anxiously. As the cartoon continued, her head finally rested on her father's shoulder. She fell asleep, holding Jessica's fingers. When Sophia was carried to bed, James lingered in the doorway of the nursery. He looked at the small body under the blanket as if it were the most precious gift. "I don't understand," he whispered. "She's eating, she's smiling." Jessica quietly closed the door. "Because she hasn't said the hardest part out loud. Her words are baby steps. She says she misses you. She says she's in pain." Yes. The next morning, Sophia woke up early. She quietly went down to the kitchen where Jessica was already putting the kettle on. The girl asked, timidly approaching. She sat down on a stool, dangling her legs in the air. Jessica was cutting an apple into thin slices. Sophia suddenly asked. This question was always difficult. "Yes, very well," Jess answered softly. Jessica's hands trembled. The knife lightly tapped on the board. Sophia looked at her intently, with an almost adult gaze. "Yes," Jessica said honestly. The girl lowered her eyes. These words sounded so calm that Jessica's heart sank. She crouched down in front of Sophia and took her hands. Sophia moved closer, and her lips trembled. "Because Daddy was like a shadow. He didn't see me. I thought if I left, maybe he would be happier." Tears rolled down her cheeks, quiet, hot. I tried so hard not to eat, but then it hurt so much. My head, my stomach, everything hurt." Jessica squeezed her small hands. "No, Sophia, Mommy would never want you to leave Daddy. She would want you to live and laugh." The girl sniffled. "And Daddy?" Something inside Jessica broke at those words. "Yes, more than he knows how to say. He was so sad that he didn't know how to live without Mommy. But he always wanted you." Sophia nodded, but her eyes said more. She was still afraid. She still doubted. And that morning she had told only half the truth. The real hardest part of her thought was still ahead. And it would only come out when not only Jessica was by her side, but also her father, the one she feared losing more than anything in the world. Jessica knew that for Sophia to fully heal, she needed to tell everything, not only to Jessica, but also to her father. The truth shouldn't lie only in a child's hands. It must be shared, so that it would no longer be heavy. And fate chose the perfect moment. That evening, James came home earlier than usual. He found Sophia in the living room. She was sitting on the floor, sorting through her toys. But you could tell from her face that she was waiting for him. The girl looked at her father, at Jessica, then back at her father. "Dad?" James immediately sat down next to her and hugged her. "Sure, honey." Sophia took his hand in hers with two small ones, as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. James took a deep breath, but didn't interrupt. "You stopped looking at me. You were home, but it was like you weren't there." The words hit him so hard that he slumped forward as if he had lost his balance. "No, no, Sophia," he breathed, squeezing her hands. "You're all I have left." Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But you were always sad." "It's not like that. It's not like that at all." His voice wavered so badly it seemed like it would break. And he broke. For the first time in months, James didn't hide his tears. He cried not like a billionaire, not like a man, but like a father who realized how close he had come to losing his child to his own muteness. Sophia wiped his tears away with her small hand. "You weren't with me, Daddy. You were somewhere far away. I thought that if I went to Mommy—" He pulled her close, holding her as carefully as if he were holding fragile glass. "My sunshine, I was lost. I was scared. I thought that if I showed how much pain I was in, I would make it worse. I was wrong. I left you alone in the worst pain. And I am so—" Jessica stood in the doorway, clasping her hands. Her heart was breaking. She knew how hard it was for a child to keep such thoughts inside. Sophia was silent for a moment, listening to his breathing, to the warmth of his hands. Then she asked quietly, "Will you be with me now?" James took her face in his hands. "Every day, every hour, I'm here, Sophia." She nodded, and for the first time, her eyes shone not only with sadness, but also with trust. This trust was fragile, like fresh ice on a lake, but it was real. The following weeks became the beginning of a new life. Sophia laughed again, ate, played, told stories that only children can invent. James stopped working nights. He began making breakfast, taking their daughter to daycare, reading to her before bed. And every Sunday evening, they did what became their little miracle: grilled cheese on toast. It was their ritual of remembrance and love, a small bridge between the past and the future. Over time, something warm also grew between James and Jessica, not rushed, not passionate, but quiet, deep, like a child's trust. He saw her hold Sophia's hand, how she heard things other adults missed. She saw in him a man unafraid to relearn how to be a father. Within a few months, they no longer felt like three different people in the same house. They were like a team, like a family, forged from pain, hope, and warm Sunday breakfasts. Sophia looked at them as if she understood better than the adults. "Then can I draw the four of us?" James knelt down. "Of course, honey." Jessica closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. She knew that in that moment, the most important thing was healed. Not only Sophia's body, but her heart as well. That night, James took Jessica out onto the balcony. The city sparkled beneath them like an upside-down sky. "You saved us," he said, "but not just once." She shook her head. "No, you saved each other." He took her hand, and in that moment she understood. Love doesn't come to homes where there's no room. It comes to places where saved hearts are ready to accept each other. Sophia, standing in the doorway, quietly whispered, "I'm glad I stayed." And that was the greatest truth of this story. Not that she hadn't eaten for 2 weeks, but that she wanted to live again.